After a brutal sandstorm ravages the Texas frontier of 1885, a grief-stricken widow must protect her newborn triplets from ruthless debt collectors while navigating an unexpected alliance with a Comanche hunter haunted by his own painful past. As bounty hunters close in and survival hangs in the balance, will these two wounded souls from different worlds find healing in the family they forged together against all odds? Blood dripped from Sarah Mitchell's cracked fingertips as she hammered the last nail into her husband's coffin. The Texas sun of 1885 beat down mercilessly, baking the freshly turned earth where four other graves already lay. She'd buried James beside the stillborn daughter they'd lost last spring, never imagining he wouldn't live to see his triplets reach 1 month old. A thin wail cut through the silence. Then another. Then a third. Sarah dropped the hammer and rushed to the shade of the lone cottonwood where 3 tiny bundles squirmed in a makeshift cradle. Her milk-swollen breasts ached as she gathered them up, whispering, "Hush now, little ones. Ma's here." 3 pairs of hungry eyes stared back. Thomas with his father's strong jaw, William with those thoughtful eyes, and tiny Emma with a fierce grip that wouldn't let go. Sarah hadn't slept more than an hour straight since they were born 2 weeks ago, just 3 days before the fever took James. The wind picked up, sending dust devils dancing across what should have been a field of corn. James had spent their last coins on special seeds that would grow despite the drought. Now those seeds lay unopened in the storage trunk, alongside unpaid bills and the deed to their homestead, a stretch of Texas borderland that no one else had managed to tame. "Shoulda listened to your pa," Sarah muttered, settling onto the porch step to nurse the babies one by one. Her father had begged her not to follow James west from Missouri. "That land kills more than it feeds," he'd warned. She glanced toward the hill where 3 small wooden crosses marked the graves of the Miller family, all dead from tainted water before Sarah and James had even arrived. The same water that had killed her husband after he dug too deep in the new well. A sharp knock startled Sarah from her thoughts. A man stood at the edge of the property, tall, broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard and clothes too fine for these parts. "Mrs. Mitchell?" His voice carried across the yard. "Willard Gant, from the bank in Willow Creek." Sarah clutched Emma tighter. The bank. James had borrowed money to buy this land, to build this house. Money they now couldn't repay. "I've come to discuss your husband's debts," Gant called, stepping closer. His eyes traveled over the modest cabin, the barren fields, then settled on the babies in her arms. Something in his gaze made Sarah's skin crawl. "Perhaps we could come to an arrangement." The way he said arrangement made her blood run cold. She'd heard stories about Gant, how he owned not just the bank but the saloon in town too, and the rooms above it where women worked on their backs. "I need time," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she felt. "The harvest." Gant laughed, the sound as dry as the cracked earth beneath his polished boots. "Look around you, Mrs. Mitchell. There won't be any harvest." He gestured to the desolate landscape. "But you have other assets." Sarah stood, backing toward the door, the triplets clutched protectively against her chest. "My husband's family is sending money," she lied. "I just need a few weeks." 2 weeks, Gant said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Then I'll be back to collect, one way or another." He tipped his hat and turned, mounting his horse with practiced ease. Sarah watched him ride away, her heart hammering against her ribs. 2 weeks, 14 days to find a miracle. Inside the cabin, she set the babies in their cradle, a drawer lined with the only clean blanket she had left. The pantry held a half sack of flour, some dried beans, and 3 strips of jerky. Not enough. Not nearly enough for a woman trying to feed 3 hungry babies. "We need help," she whispered to the sleeping infants. But help was 20 miles away in Willow Creek, and the only neighbor for miles had abandoned his homestead last winter after losing 2 fingers to frostbite. Sarah sank to her knees beside the cradle, exhaustion washing over her in waves. Just 5 minutes of rest, she promised herself, laying her head beside the babies. 5 minutes to gather strength. She woke to darkness and silence. Complete, unnatural silence. No insects chirping. No night birds calling. Even the wind had died. Sarah lurched to her feet, panic seizing her chest until she heard the soft breathing of her babies. They were fine, still sleeping. But something was wrong. She stumbled to the window, peering out at the moonlit yard. A dark line stretched across the horizon, taller than the hills, wider than the sky itself. Not clouds, not rain, sand. The old-timers in Willow Creek had spoken of dust storms that could bury a house up to its roof, strip paint from walls, and fill a man's lungs until he drowned on dry land. But Sarah had never seen one, never imagined anything so massive could move across the earth. And it was coming straight for them. She grabbed the water bucket, her hands shaking so badly she sloshed half its contents onto the floor. The storm would bring suffocating dust. They would need water, food, shelter, the root cellar. James had dug it first thing after building the cabin. Always have a safe place, he'd said. Sarah gathered the babies, wrapping them together in their blanket. Thomas fussed, his tiny fists waving in protest at being disturbed. Shoo, sweetheart, we need to hide. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, tasting salt and fear on her lips. Outside, the air had gone still as death. Even the stars seemed to be holding their breath. The line of darkness had drawn closer, towering above the land like a mountain come to life. Sarah raced for the cellar doors set into the ground beside the house. She shifted the babies to one arm, blisters on her palm breaking open as she yanked on the heavy wooden handle. The door didn't budge. Sarah pulled harder, panic giving her strength. The wood creaked but remained firmly shut. The summer heat had warped it, the frame swollen tight against the doors. She tried again, throwing her weight back, the strain making spots dance before her eyes. The door lifted an inch, then slammed shut again. A rumble like distant thunder rolled across the plains. The storm was coming faster now, eating up the land between them. Sarah pounded on the cellar door with her fist. "Please," she screamed, though there was no one to hear. "Please open." In her arms, the babies began to cry, their wails rising with the wind that suddenly gusted across the yard, carrying the first stinging particles of sand. Sarah looked wildly around the yard. The cabin wouldn't protect them, not with its half-finished walls and gaps in the roof. They needed shelter, real shelter. Her eyes fell on the hill behind the house, the Buffalo Wallow, an ancient depression in the earth where the great beasts had once rolled to coat themselves in dust. Deep enough to break the wind, their only chance. Clutching her children to her chest, Sarah ran. The first blast of wind nearly knocked Sarah off her feet. It howled across the plain like a living thing, hungry and fierce, tearing at her nightdress and whipping her unbound hair into her eyes. The triplets screamed against her chest, their tiny faces turning red with effort. "Just a little farther," she gasped, though no one could hear her over the storm's roar. The wallow lay ahead, a shallow basin in the earth where tall grass still grew, sheltered from the worst of the sun. If they could reach it before the full fury hit. Something hard struck her shoulder, a branch torn loose by the wind. Sarah stumbled, nearly losing her grip on the babies. Emma's blanket caught on a thorn bush, unraveling as Sarah lurched forward. She couldn't stop to fix it. The dark wall of the storm was almost upon them, blotting out moon and stars. The first wave of sand hit like needles, thousands of tiny daggers pricking every inch of exposed skin. Sarah hunched lower, using her body to shield the infants. Their screams had changed to choking coughs as dust filled the air. William's face was turning blue, his tiny chest heaving. "No, no, no," Sarah moaned, dropping to her knees and bending over the babies. She tore a strip from her nightdress, covering William's face with the thin cloth. It wasn't enough. None of this was enough. The wallow was only yards away now. Sarah crawled the last distance, her knees bloody and raw against the rocky ground. The depression offered little protection, just a dip in the landscape, a mere suggestion of shelter. But the wind seemed to leap over its rim, giving them a few precious feet of calmer air. Sarah pressed herself against the earthen wall, curling around her children. Sand piled against her back in minutes, weighing her down, trickling into her ears and nostrils. She tucked her face into the bundle of babies, creating a small pocket of breathable air they could share. "Sing them to sleep," James had always said when the babies were restless. "Your voice is the sweetest thing they know." So Sarah sang, her voice breaking over lullabies as the storm raged overhead. She sang as dust filled her mouth and eyes. Sang as the world disappeared behind a curtain of flying earth. Sang until her throat burned and her lips cracked and bled. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost all meaning in the howling chaos. The weight on Sarah's back grew heavier as sand piled higher. She struggled to move, to keep from being buried alive with her children. A sudden shift in the wind sent a spray of sand directly into their small air pocket. Thomas inhaled and began to choke, his tiny body convulsing. Sarah rolled onto her side, desperate to clear his airway. She turned him over, patting his back with trembling fingers, praying to a God she wasn't sure was listening anymore. "Please," she cried, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Please don't take him too." As if in answer, the wind changed again, swirling up and away from their shelter. Thomas gave one last pitiful cough and drew a shuddering breath. Sarah sagged with relief, only to realize the storm's fury had doubled. The entire wallow was filling with sand faster than she could fight it. Soon they would be buried completely. She clawed at the rising drifts, trying to create a channel for air. Her fingernails tore as she dug, leaving smears of blood on the sand. It was useless. For every handful she moved, the wind deposited 10 more. "James," she whispered, "I can't do this alone." The triplets had gone quiet, too quiet. Sarah's heart seized with terror as she checked each tiny face. They were breathing, but barely, their skin dusted white like little ghosts. A shadow fell across them, darker than the storm-dark air, solid and massive. Sarah looked up, sand stinging her eyes, fear clutching her throat. A man stood at the edge of the wallow, tall and broad-shouldered, his face wrapped in cloth against the storm, only his eyes visible, dark eyes that reflected no light. Not Gant. This man was dressed in buckskins, with a knife at his belt and a bow slung across his back. His long black hair whipped around his shoulders despite being partially braided with small tokens woven into the strands. Comanche. Stories flashed through Sarah's mind. Brutal raids on settlements, scalpings women carried off. She clutched her babies tighter, though she knew she had no strength left to fight or run. The man's eyes narrowed, taking in the scene, the half-buried woman, the 3 tiny bundles, the hopeless shelter being devoured by the storm. Without a word, he slid down into the wallow beside her. Sarah flinched away, but there was nowhere to go. She watched in confusion as he unfastened a leather pouch from his belt and extracted something wrapped in cloth. He held it out to her, a small packet. When she didn't move, he unwrapped it himself, revealing a paste of dark berries. "For breathing," he said, his English heavily accented but clear. "On lips. On babies." Sarah hesitated. The man could have killed her already if that was his intention. And the babies, they were fading before her eyes as the dust clogged their tiny lungs. With a shaking hand, she took the paste, dabbing it gently on each child's lips. The man nodded, then pointed urgently up the slope. "Bad place. Water come here when rain." Sarah looked where he pointed, understanding dawning through her fear. The wallow would become a death trap if the storm brought rain. They were sitting in what would become a muddy grave. The man was already moving, gathering branches and brush from around the wallow's edge. He worked quickly, weaving them together, creating a frame that he covered with a hide from his pack. A shelter, crude but stronger than anything Sarah could have managed. He pointed to the babies. "Give." Sarah clutched them tighter, instinctive protection overriding logic. The man's eyes softened. He touched his chest. "Tabe," then pointed to her. Sarah," she managed through cracked lips. Tabe nodded, then gestured again to the babies. "Give. I help." The storm was worsening, sand piling around them faster than ever. They had no choice. Sarah passed him Thomas first, then William. She kept Emma against her chest, unable to relinquish all 3 at once. To her surprise, Tabe handled the infants with practiced ease, tucking them inside his buckskin shirt against his bare chest. Their tiny faces peeked out at the collar, protected from the worst of the flying sand. He motioned for Emma, but Sarah shook her head. Some things a mother couldn't surrender, even in the face of death. A flash of understanding crossed Tabe's face. He didn't press her, instead gripping her arm and pulling her to her feet. Sarah's legs buckled. Hours of being half-buried had left them numb and useless. Without a word, Tabe ducked down and lifted her with his free arm, cradling her against his side as if she weighed nothing. He carried them out of the wallow, fighting against wind that threatened to tear them apart. Sarah buried her face against his shoulder, using her body to shield Emma from the worst of the storm. They moved slowly through a world turned to chaos, Tabe's strength the only thing keeping them from being swept away. Through stinging eyes, Sarah glimpsed rocky outcroppings ahead, the start of the ridge that marked the northern boundary of her property. Tabe angled toward a shadow darker than the rest, a crack in the stone face, barely visible through the swirling sand. A cave, Sarah realized with a surge of hope. Real shelter. They were just yards away when a sound cut through the storm's howl, the distant crack of a rifle shot, followed by another. Tabe froze, his head turning toward the sound like a wolf scenting danger. The shots came again, closer this time. 3 in rapid succession. "What is it?" Sarah cried, though she knew. Only one person would be searching for them in this hellish storm. Gant had returned early, and he wasn't alone. Tabe's expression hardened. He pushed forward with renewed urgency, practically throwing them into the cave's entrance. Inside, the air was suddenly, blissfully still. Sarah gasped, drinking in dust-free breaths as Tabe carefully extracted the twin boys from inside his shirt. To her amazement, they were sleeping peacefully, their faces clean where his skin had protected them. "How?" she began, but Tabe was already moving back toward the cave entrance, bow in hand. "Men come," he said simply. "Bad men." "You don't understand," Sarah said, desperation making her voice rise. "They'll kill you. They're looking for me." Tabe paused, studying her face in the dim light filtering through the cave mouth. Why men hunt women with babies? How could she explain? About James's debts, about Gant's arrangement, about what would happen to her children if they were found? "Please," was all she could manage. "They can't find us." For a long moment, Tabe was silent, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, decisive. "Make fire," he instructed, pointing to a small pile of wood stacked against the cave wall. "Small fire. Stay back from mouth of cave." He handed her a small pouch of tinder and flint, then turned to go. "Where are you going?" Sarah clutched at his arm, fear making her forget herself. Tabe didn't pull away. Instead, he placed a hand briefly over hers. "Make false trail. Lead men away." His dark eyes held hers. "Come back." It was a promise, Sarah realized. From a stranger. Comanche warrior. A man who by all rights should have been her enemy. And yet, as she watched him slip out into the howling storm, her children sleeping safely beside her, Sarah found herself believing him. She struck the flint with shaking hands, wondering what twist of fate had sent this man to them, and what would happen when the storm finally cleared. 2 winters had passed since Tabe buried his wife and son. The smallpox had come like a ghost in the night, stealing breath and life before the medicine man could fight it. Since that day, Tabe walked among his Quahati Comanche band as if he too had died, hunting alone and speaking little. "You have become a shadow," his uncle, Chief Quanah, had told him last night by the council fire. "The spirits say you must find your heart again or join your family in the next world." So Tabe had ridden out alone at dawn, tracking a wounded antelope across the windswept plains. He hadn't meant to travel so far from camp, but the blood trail led him deeper into the borderlands where few dared to hunt. When the storm signs appeared, birds flying low, a strange stillness in the air, he knew he should turn back. The elders had been warning of a great dust storm for days. Yet something pulled him forward. Perhaps it was the death wish his uncle feared. Perhaps it was something else. The storm hit with sudden fury, forcing Tabe to abandon his horse in a sheltered grove and continue on foot to a rock outcropping he knew from childhood hunts. There, pressed against stone as the world disappeared behind walls of flying sand, he waited for the worst to pass. When the wind shifted slightly, creating a momentary pocket of clarity, Tabe heard it, a sound no hunter could mistake. A baby's cry, quickly smothered by the storm's roar. Then another, and another. 3 distinct cries. Impossible. No Comanche mother would be caught in the open during such a storm, and white settlers rarely ventured this far from their forts and towns. Wrapping a strip of hide around his face, leaving only his eyes exposed, Tabe moved toward the sound. The wind fought him, sand scouring any exposed skin. He followed the slope downward, toward what he knew was an old buffalo wallow. And inside, barely visible through the swirling dust, something moved. A woman lay half buried in sand, her body curved protectively around a bundle of cloth. Her skin was pale despite the sunburn on her cheeks, her hair the color of summer wheat. A white woman, alone in Comanche hunting grounds, in the middle of a killer storm. Tabe's first thought was to retreat. His people had suffered enough at the hands of white soldiers and settlers. Finding a white woman here could bring the bluecoats, bring death to his band who camped just 3 ridges away. Then the bundle in her arms shifted, and a tiny face appeared, red and gasping as sand filled its mouth. Then another face, and a third. 3 babies, newborns from their size. Tabe remembered holding his own son as the spotted sickness claimed him, remembered the helplessness as the small body struggled for breath. Some pains crossed all boundaries between peoples. Decision made, he slid down into the wallow. The woman's eyes flew open at his approach, eyes wide with terror when they registered his appearance. She clutched the babies tighter despite arms that trembled with exhaustion. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear over the storm's howl. "Please," she managed, her voice raw from dust. "They're just babies." Tabe removed the medicine pouch from his belt. Inside was the paste his grandmother had made, crushed juniper berries and yucca root mixed with bear fat. It cleared the lungs in bad dust. He showed it to the woman using the few English words he knew. "For breathing," he said. "On lips. On babies." The woman hesitated only briefly. Whatever fear she held of him was nothing compared to her fear for her children. With shaking hands, she took the paste, dabbing it on each tiny mouth. Tabe surveyed the wallow as she worked. This depression would become a death trap when rain followed the dust, as it often did. Already sand was piling up around them, threatening to bury them alive. He gathered what little brush remained around the wallow's edge and constructed a hasty shelter, just enough to block the worst of the flying sand while he thought of a better plan. "Give," he said, gesturing to the infants. They needed to move to find real protection. The woman clutched them tighter, fear returning to her eyes. Tabe touched his chest. "Tabe," then pointed to her, waiting. "Sarah," she managed, her voice barely audible. Trust began with names. Tabe pointed again to the babies. "Give. I help." Slowly, reluctantly, Sarah handed him 2 of the infants. Identical boys with scraps of dark hair plastered to their tiny heads. Tabe tucked them inside his buckskin shirt against his skin, the way Comanche mothers carried their newborns. The third baby, a girl with a fierce grip, remained clutched against Sarah's chest. Tabe understood. No mother would surrender all her children to a stranger, especially a stranger whose people were feared as devils by her kind. He helped Sarah to her feet, but her legs folded immediately. Without asking permission, Tabe lifted her with his free arm. She weighed little more than a child herself, this woman who had fought the storm to protect her babies. He carried them through the blinding chaos toward the ridge where he knew caves dotted the limestone face. One in particular was deep enough to offer true shelter. It was nearly half a mile away, each step a battle against wind that sought to tear them from the earth. They had traveled perhaps halfway when Tabe heard it, the distant crack of gunfire. 3 shots in rapid succession, a white man's weapon. Someone was searching in a storm. No hunter would fire blindly into such chaos. These shots were signals, one person calling to another. Sarah stiffened against him, her fingers digging into his arm. "Please," she gasped. "They can't find us." Tabe didn't need to ask who they were. He'd seen enough of white men's cruelty to understand that some hunted their own kind, and a woman alone with children would be easy prey. The rifle shots came again, closer now. For men on horseback materialized through the storm like evil spirits, their faces wrapped against the dust, rifles ready. Tabe pressed Sarah against a boulder, shielding her with his body as the riders passed barely 20 paces away. "Gant thinks she went north," one shouted over the wind. "She's got them babies," another called back. "She can't have gone far." Tabe felt Sarah trembling against him. These men hunted her like wolves after wounded prey. But why? When the riders disappeared back into the swirling dust, Tabe resumed their journey toward the cave. Sarah stumbled beside him, clutching her daughter, while the twin boys remained safely tucked against Tabe's chest. Both had fallen asleep, lulled by his heartbeat and body warmth. The cave appeared ahead, a darker shadow in the brown haze. Inside, the sudden silence was startling after the storm's constant roar. Tabe gently set Sarah down on a dry patch of sand near the back wall and extracted the infants from his shirt. They barely stirred, their tiny faces peaceful in sleep. Sarah collapsed against the cave wall, cradling all 3 babies now, her eyes never leaving Tabe as he moved about the cave. He found the wood stack he kept there for hunting trips and quickly built a small fire near the entrance, where the draft would pull smoke outward. "Why men hunt you?" he asked, settling across from her, the fire between them casting dancing shadows on the rock walls. Sarah stared into the flames for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes held both fear and fierce determination. "My husband died," she said slowly, as if choosing her words carefully for his limited English. "He owed money to a bad man. Gant." She spat the name like a curse. "He said I could work for him in his saloon." Her cheeks colored. Upstairs. Tabe understood. Even among his people, there were men who would take advantage of a woman without protection. But to pursue her with such violence, and with 3 infant children? "He said if I refused, he'd take my babies," Sarah continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Said he knew people who would pay good money for white children, especially boys." Anger flared in Tabe's chest. Child stealers were the lowest of creatures. Among the Comanche, such men would be staked on an anthill and left for the sun to finish. "How many men with Gant?" he asked, already calculating their chances. "For when they came to the farm yesterday," Sarah replied. "He wasn't supposed to return for 2 weeks. The storm must have made him worry I'd run." Tabe nodded. The banker had guessed correctly. "Where you go if not here?" Sarah's shoulders slumped. "Nowhere. I have no family left. No friends close enough to help." She looked down at the sleeping triplets. "I just couldn't let him take them." Something shifted in Tabe's chest. A feeling he had thought died with his family. Purpose. The emptiness that had haunted him for 2 years seemed to recede as he watched this pale woman fight for her children with the same fierceness as any Comanche mother. "Sleep," he said, rising to his feet. "I watch." Sarah's eyes widened with alarm. "Where are you going?" "Make false trail," Tabe explained. "Lead men away. Come back." It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but the relief in her eyes made it worth the risk. As he slipped back into the raging storm, Tabe felt more alive than he had since burying his son. Perhaps his uncle was right. Perhaps it was time to find his heart again. "You let her escape." Willard Gant's face contorted with rage as he backhanded the youngest of his hired guns. Blood sprayed from the man's split lip, disappearing instantly into the swirling dust. "She's a woman with 3 newborn babies. For God's sake." Gant's 3 companions huddled miserably on their horses, sand burning their eyes despite the bandanas tied across their faces. Only Dick Miller, Gant's foreman and right-hand man, dared to speak. "Storm came up too fast, boss. We tracked her to that buffalo wallow, but then we lost the trail." "Find it again," Gant snarled, drawing his pistol. Those brats will fetch $200 each from the right buyers in Mexico. And the woman. His eyes narrowed with cruel intent. She needs to learn what happens to those who defy me. The men spread out, fighting against the wind that tore at their clothes and the sand that threatened to strip flesh from bone. None of them wanted to be here, hunting a widow and her children through a killer storm, but Gant's money spent just as well as honest pay. And in this godforsaken corner of Texas, honest work was scarce as water. Miller squinted through the flying dust, then suddenly yanked his horse to a stop. "Tracks here," he shouted over the wind. "Leading south." The men converged on the spot where fresh footprints marked the sand. Large prints, a man's boots, partially covering smaller ones. And beside them, dark stains that could only be blood. "She's not alone," Gant growled, checking his rifle. "Someone's helping her." "Injun tracks," Miller said, pointing to the distinctive pattern of the footprint. "Comanche, by the look of it." The youngest hired gun, barely 20 and with more bravado than sense, spat into the storm. "Probably taken her for himself. Savages like white women." Gant's expression shifted from anger to calculation. "Then we're not just debt collectors anymore, boys. We're rescuers." A cold smile spread across his face. "The army pays $50 for every white captive returned. Add that to what we'll get for the brats, and this trip just got more profitable." They followed the tracks southward, unaware of the dark figure watching from a ridge above. Tabe had laid his false trail well, using blood from a jackrabbit to suggest injury, deliberately making his footprints visible in sheltered patches of sand. The white men took the bait, heading away from the cave where Sarah and her children rested. Tabe circled back, moving silently through terrain he knew by memory, even blinded by the storm. The cave entrance was just visible ahead when a sixth sense made him drop to his belly. Crawling forward, he peered through a break in the dust. A lone rider sat motionless on his horse not 30 paces from the cave mouth, the youngest of the white men, separated from his companions by the storm. By terrible luck, he had stumbled upon their sanctuary. The young man dismounted, rifle ready, and moved cautiously toward the cave. From inside, Tabe could see the faint glow of the fire Sarah had built. It would be visible to anyone close enough. Tabe knocked an arrow, taking careful aim despite the howling wind. He had not killed a white man in 3 winters, not since the last raid before his band had sought peace. To shed blood now could bring soldiers, bring death to his people. But the young gunman was already raising his rifle, aiming into the cave where Sarah huddled with her children. Tabe's arrow flew true, striking the man's shoulder rather than his heart. The gunman screamed, his shot going wild, the sound lost in the storm's fury. His horse bolted as he fell, disappearing into the swirling dust. Tabe was on him in an instant, kicking the fallen rifle away and pressing his knife to the man's throat. "Go," he growled in English. "Tell others woman dead, children dead. Storm take them." The young man's eyes widened with terror. Don't kill me," he stammered. "I was just following orders." "Go," Tabe repeated, pressing the knife harder. "Or die here." He released the gunman, who scrambled away, clutching his wounded shoulder. Tabe watched until he disappeared into the storm before turning toward the cave. Sarah stood in the entrance, the girl child clutched against her chest, her face pale with fear. "I heard a shot," she said. "Is he?" "Lives," Tabe said grimly. "But we'll bring others. Must move soon." Inside the cave, he checked on the twin boys, still sleeping peacefully. The fire had burned low, but had kept the worst of the cave's dampness at bay. Sarah sank down beside her sons, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "I can't run with 3 babies," she whispered. "And you've risked too much already." Tabe considered their options. The storm would last another day at least, judging by the color of the sky. The white men would be forced to seek shelter soon. Even their greed wouldn't keep them hunting through the night. That gave them until morning. "My people camp 3 ridges north," he said finally. "Safe there." Sarah's head jerked up, hope and doubt warring in her expression. Your people? You mean, your Comanche band? Tabe nodded. Chief is my mother's brother. He will give protection. But I'm white, Sarah said softly. Won't they? She didn't finish the question. Tabe understood her fear. The stories whites told about his people were not all false. There had been raids, captives taken, bloodshed on both sides. But that was before the spotted sickness decimated their numbers, before the buffalo hunters destroyed their way of life. 3 babies born at once is powerful medicine, he explained. My people will see this as sign from spirits. Sarah looked doubtful but had no better plan to offer. How far? 1 day's walk for strong man. Longer with children. A gust of wind threw sand through the cave entrance, making the fire sputter. Outside, the storm's fury was building again, the brief lull ending. Sarah tucked the blanket more securely around her daughter. Why are you helping us? She asked suddenly. Your people and mine. We're supposed to be enemies. Tabe gazed into the dying fire, seeing another time, another place. I had wife, had son. He touched the medicine pouch at his waist. Spotted sickness took them 2 winters past. Understanding passed between them, a bridge built on shared grief. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered. Tabe nodded, accepting her words as they were meant. Then he rose and moved to the cave entrance, studying the storm. Rest now, he advised. Journey hard tomorrow. As Sarah settled beside her children, Tabe stood watch, bow ready. The wounded gunman might return with his companions, or he might flee back to town. Either way, they couldn't stay in the cave much longer. They would need to brave the storm again at first light, heading for his people's camp. It was a dangerous gamble. The Quahati band might welcome a white woman with 3 infants as a sign from the spirits, or they might see her as a threat to be eliminated. Much would depend on his uncle's wisdom and the band's medicine man. As night fell and the storm raged on, Tabe found himself praying for the first time since burying his family. Not to the Christian God the missionaries preached about, but to the spirits of earth and sky that had guided his people for generations. They would need all the help they could get to survive what lay ahead. At dawn, the storm's fury finally broke. Sunlight filtered through thinning clouds of dust, revealing a landscape transformed. Sand drifts taller than a man covered familiar landmarks. The world had been erased and redrawn overnight. Sarah woke to find Tabe already gone from the cave. Panic fluttered in her chest until she spotted him outside, scanning the horizon with the focused intensity of a hawk. He'd removed the cloth from his face, revealing strong features weathered by sun and wind. Not the monster from childhood nightmares, but a man, wary, watchful, and weighed down by his own grief. The triplets stirred against her, hungry after the long night. Sarah nursed them one by one, wondering what the day would bring. Trust didn't come easily after all she'd endured. Yet this stranger had saved them when he could have simply passed by. Perhaps the God she'd begun to doubt hadn't abandoned her after all. Tabe returned, carrying a small desert hare. Eat, he said, preparing the meat with practiced efficiency. Needs strength for journey. Sarah hesitated only briefly before accepting the food. The rich taste made her dizzy after days of near starvation. Thank you, she managed between bites. White men gone, Tabe reported, packing his few belongings. Storm drive them back to town, but will return. How far to your people? Sarah asked, gathering her babies. 3 ridges. Walk all day, reach by nightfall. Sarah looked down at her tattered nightdress and bare feet, blistered and raw from yesterday's desperate flight. The thought of walking miles through desert terrain seemed impossible. But so had surviving the storm with 3 newborns. I'm ready, she said, squaring her shoulders. Tabe studied her with newfound respect. This pale woman had the heart of a warrior. He fashioned a carrying sling for the twin boys from his spare buckskin shirt, showing Sarah how to position them against her chest. The girl child he secured in a smaller sling across her back. Baby's safe, he assured her, adjusting the knots. Comanche mothers carry this way while gathering food. They set out as the sun climbed higher, Tabe leading them along a route only he could see. The storm had exposed strange treasures half buried in the sand. A wagon wheel, the skull of a longhorn steer, the rusted barrel of a rifle. Sarah wondered how many others had tried to tame this land and failed, their possessions becoming part of the desert itself. By midday, the temperature had soared. Sarah's mouth felt like cotton, her legs trembling with each step. The triplets, miraculously, slept through most of the journey, lulled by the steady motion and warm cocoon of the slings. "Rest here," Tabe said, guiding her to the shade of a rocky overhang. He offered his water skin, watching carefully as she drank. Small sips. Too much makes sick. While Sarah rested, Tabe climbed to higher ground, scanning their back trail. No dust clouds rose from pursuing horsemen, but his instincts prickled with warning. The young gunman he had wounded might have reached town by now. Reinforcements could be gathering. "How did you lose your family?" Sarah asked when he returned, her voice soft with genuine compassion. Tabe stiffened. White settlers rarely saw Indians as people with families, with losses that cut as deeply as their own. Yet her question held no mockery, only shared understanding of grief. "Spotted sickness," he replied, sitting beside her. "First my son, then my wife Numunu. Many others in band also walked spirit path that winter." "Smallpox," Sarah nodded, recognizing the disease. "My pa was a doctor during the war. Said it was worse than bullets for taking lives." "Your husband?" Tabe asked. "The fever. Bad water from our new well." James was too stubborn to listen to warnings. A sad smile crossed her face. "He was always rushing ahead without looking for danger. Said we'd build a cattle empire bigger than any in Texas." "The land decides who stays," Tabe observed. "Not dreams of men." They resumed their journey as the afternoon wore on, the terrain growing steadily more rugged. They crossed a dry creek bed where flash floods had carved deep channels in the earth, then began climbing a ridge dotted with stunted juniper and sage. Sarah's strength was failing. Each step became an act of will, her vision blurring at the edges. The twins had begun to fuss, hungry again, but she had no safe place to stop and nurse them. "Not far now," Tabe encouraged, taking the sling with the boys to lighten her burden. "Next ridge, my people." Just as the words left his mouth, a sound split the air, the distinctive crack of a rifle shot. Dirt sprayed up at their feet, followed by the delayed report echoing across the canyon. "Down," Tabe commanded, pulling Sarah behind a boulder as a second shot whined overhead. "Thought you said they went back to town," Sarah gasped, clutching Emma tighter. "Not all," Tabe replied grimly, peering around the rock. "One waits, watches for our trail." From their position, he could just make out a lone figure on horseback atop the ridge they had descended an hour earlier. The glint of sunlight on a rifle barrel confirmed his suspicions. One of Gant's men had stayed behind, probably ordered to follow at a distance and report back. "Can we go around?" Sarah asked, trying to quiet the increasingly hungry infants. Tabe shook his head. "Only one path up ahead. Must cross open ground." Sarah's face fell. After all they had endured, to be stopped just short of safety seemed unbearably cruel. "I could try to draw his fire," she suggested desperately, "while you take the babies." "No." Tabe's expression hardened. "I deal with this." He handed her his knife. "If I not return, follow ridge line north. Look for smoke from cooking fires. Tell them Tabe sends you." Before Sarah could protest, he was gone, moving with the fluid grace of a mountain lion as he worked his way down into a ravine that would shield him from the watcher's view. Left alone with 3 increasingly distressed babies, Sarah pressed herself against the sun-warmed stone and prayed. Not the polite, Sunday morning prayers of her childhood, but raw, desperate pleas for mercy. These children deserved a chance at life. They deserved more than becoming orphans twice over in the space of a month. Time stretched endlessly. The babies' cries grew louder, impossible to quiet without feeding them. Sarah knew the sound would carry in the still air, revealing their position to the gunmen. Yet she couldn't let them suffer. Decision made, she began nursing William first, then Thomas, all while keeping Emma close. If the gunman came, she would face him with Tabe's knife and a mother's fury. A distant cry finally broke the silence. Sharp, abrupt, and quickly cut off. Sarah held her breath, straining to hear any clue to what had happened. Minutes later, a familiar figure appeared around the bend. Tabe's face was grim, a fresh streak of blood on his cheek. But the bow in his hand was unbloodied. "Man gone," he said simply. "Frightened away." Sarah didn't ask for details. Some questions were better left unasked in this harsh land. "Can we reach your people before dark?" Tabe nodded, helping her to her feet. "Come. No more stops now." They pushed on through the afternoon heat, climbing steadily higher into rocky terrain where wind-twisted pines clung to crevices. Sarah moved like one in a dream, her body continuing forward though her mind had retreated to some distant place where pain couldn't reach. As the sun touched the western horizon, they crested the final ridge. Below them, nestled in a protected valley, lay a cluster of conical shelters, teepees of buffalo hide arranged in a circle around a central clearing. "Your home?" Sarah whispered, fear and hope mingling in her voice. "Yes," Tabe replied, but his expression had grown guarded, his posture tense. Whatever welcome awaited them, he was uncertain of it himself. They had taken only a few steps down the slope when the alarm was raised. Sharp cries echoed across the valley as sentries spotted their approach. Within moments, a group of mounted warriors raced toward them, weapons ready. Sarah froze, clutching her babies as the riders surrounded them. Fierce eyes examined her from beneath eagle feathers and painted symbols she couldn't understand. One warrior, older than the rest with streaks of gray in his braided hair, dismounted and approached Tabe. Words flew between them in the musical Comanche language, too fast for Sarah to guess their meaning. The older man's voice rose in what sounded like anger, his gestures sharp and demanding. Tabe responded calmly but firmly, once indicating Sarah and the triplets with a sweep of his hand. The exchange grew more heated. Other warriors joined in, some pointing at Sarah with expressions of disgust or suspicion. She stood alone in their midst, a white woman where no white woman should be, clutching her children and waiting for judgment. The argument reached its peak when a new voice cut through the clamor. A woman's voice, strong and commanding. The crowd parted as an elderly woman with a deeply lined face made her way forward, leaning on a walking stick decorated with feathers and small animal bones. The camp fell silent. Even the horses seemed to quiet at her approach. She stopped before Sarah, her dark eyes, sharp despite her obvious age, examining each of the triplets in turn. Then, to Sarah's astonishment, the old woman smiled. "Three spirits come together," she said in perfect English. "Very strong medicine." She turned to the gathered warriors. "The mother and children will stay." As simple as that, their fate was decided. The old woman, Grandmother Sakima, Sarah would later learn, took her by the arm and led her down toward the camp, leaving the men to continue their discussion. Behind them, Tabe watched with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. He had fulfilled his promise to bring Sarah to safety. Now he had to convince his people that harboring a white woman and her children wouldn't bring destruction upon them all. Willard Gant slammed his fist onto the polished wood of his desk, making the oil lamp jump and sputter. "One woman, 3 newborn infants, and you're telling me they've vanished into thin air?" The 3 men before him shifted uneasily, hats clutched in dirt-encrusted hands. Only Dick Miller, his foreman, met his gaze directly. "Wasn't natural, boss," Miller insisted. "That storm came up faster than any I've seen in 20 years on the frontier. And Johnson swears he saw Comanche tracks." "Where is Johnson?" Gant demanded, noticing the absence of his youngest hired gun. The men exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Ain't seen him since the storm separated us," Miller admitted. "Figured he might have headed back to town on his own." Gant's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Johnson was green, but he wasn't stupid enough to brave that kind of storm alone. If he hadn't returned, "Get cleaned up," he ordered, already reaching for his coat. "We ride again at dawn. And this time, we bring enough men to search every Comanche camp between here and the Red River." "That's army business, boss," Miller cautioned. "If she's been taken by Indians, then we're rescuers, not debt collectors," Gant finished with a cold smile. "The army pays $50 for every white captive returned. Add that to what we'll get for the brats in Mexico, and this trip just got more profitable." Miller nodded slowly, though his expression remained doubtful. "What about Sheriff Brooks? He might ask questions if we gather too many men." "Brooks knows better than to interfere with my business," Gant replied dismissively. "But just to be safe, spread the word that we're organizing a rescue party. Say the widow Mitchell and her babies were carried off by savages during the storm." The men departed, leaving Gant alone with his thoughts and a bottle of expensive Kentucky bourbon. The widow's defiance had become more than a financial inconvenience. It was a challenge to his authority. In a town where his word was law, such rebellion couldn't be tolerated. He poured himself another drink, savoring the burn as he considered how to proceed. If the woman had indeed found shelter with a Comanche band, retrieving her would require a delicate touch. The army had negotiated uneasy peace with several groups, but tensions remained high. One wrong move could spark a conflict that would draw unwanted attention from territorial authorities. A knock at the door interrupted his planning. "Enter," he called impatiently. The man who stepped into the office wasn't one of his usual associates. Tall and rail-thin with the unmistakable bearing of a military man, though he wore civilian clothes. "Mr. Gant." The stranger's voice was cultured, his accent hinting at Eastern education. "Captain James Harper, formerly of the 4th Cavalry. I understand you're organizing a rescue mission." Gant studied the newcomer with interest. "News travels fast in Willow Creek. I have a particular interest in Comanche activities," Harper explained, refusing the offered drink with a polite gesture. "I've spent the last 3 years tracking the movements of the remaining free bands, particularly the Quahati under Quanah Parker." "And why would a former cavalry officer concern himself with such matters?" Gant asked, suddenly wary. Harper's expression hardened. "Personal reasons. Suffice it to say, I have extensive knowledge of Comanche territory and fighting tactics. Knowledge that might prove useful if you intend to retrieve this woman and her children." Gant considered the offer. Having a man with military experience would certainly increase their chances of success. And if things went badly, a former army officer would make an excellent scapegoat. "Very well, Captain," he decided. "We leave at first light. I assume you're adequately armed." "Always," Harper replied with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. As the captain departed, Gant returned to his bourbon, a sense of satisfaction warming his chest. The widow's situation had just grown considerably more complicated. In the Comanche camp, Sarah sat cross-legged outside grandmother Sekima's teepee, watching with fascination as the old woman ground herbs in a stone mortar. 3 days had passed since their arrival, 3 days of curious stares, guarded acceptance, and slowly building trust. The triplets lay nearby on a soft buffalo robe, cooing and waving tiny fists at the sunlight filtering through the branches above. They had thrived under Sekima's care, their skin clearing of rashes with her herbal salves, their bellies full from Sarah's milk now flowing abundantly thanks to the nourishing stews the women provided. "Your baby's strong," Sekima observed, her English heavily accented but clear. "3 spirits born together, very rare. Very powerful." Sarah smiled, still amazed at how the elderly medicine woman had become their fiercest advocate. "Where did you learn English so well?" "Mission school long ago," Sekima replied, her expression revealing nothing of what that experience had entailed. "Good to know enemies' words, to understand their plans." Enemy. The term hung in the air between them, a reminder of the vast divides separating their worlds. Yet here sat Sarah, a white woman welcomed into the heart of a Comanche camp, her children already being treated as precious treasures belonging to the entire band. "Why did you help us?" Sarah asked, the question that had burned in her mind since that first night. Sakima's weathered hands paused in their work. Dreams showed 3 stars falling from sky. Told me to watch for them. She gestured to the triplets. 3 stars. 3 babies. Before Sarah could respond, a commotion arose from the far side of camp. Warriors were gathering, weapons in hand, voices raised in urgent discussion. At their center stood Tabe, gesturing emphatically toward the northern ridge. Sakima rose with surprising agility for her age. "Trouble comes," she said grimly. "Take babies inside." Sarah quickly gathered the triplets, hurrying into the shelter of the teepee. Through the partially open flap, she watched the camp transform from peaceful domesticity to battle-ready alertness in moments. Women gathered children and began packing essentials. Young men checked weapons while elders conferred in a tight circle. Tabe broke away from the group, striding purposefully towards Sakima's dwelling. His face was tight with concern as he ducked inside. "White men come," he said without preamble. "Many, with guns." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Gant," Tabe nodded. "And others. Soldiers, maybe." "But why would soldiers?" Sarah began, then understanding dawned with sickening clarity. "They're saying I was captured. That you took me against my will." "Yes, good story for them. Rescue white woman from savages. Look like heroes." Tabe's voice held no bitterness, merely stating facts. "But real plan is take babies." Sakima spoke rapidly in Comanche, her question clear from her tone even without translation. "She asks what you want to do," Tabe explained to Sarah. "Stay or go?" "Go where?" Sarah asked desperately. "There's nowhere safe." "Mexico," Tabe suggested. "Many days south. Comanche trade there sometimes. Or west to mountains. Hide until men give up search." The prospect of fleeing again, of raising her children as fugitives in a foreign land, filled Sarah with despair. Yet what choice did she have? Returning with Gant meant a life of degradation for her and separation from her babies, or worse. "What about your people?" she asked, suddenly aware of the danger she had brought to their doorstep. "If soldiers attack because of me." "Our fight too," Tabe interrupted firmly. "Child stealers lowest of creatures. All Comanche know this." A young warrior appeared at the teepee entrance, speaking urgently to Tabe. Whatever news he brought caused Tabe's expression to darken further. "What is it?" Sarah demanded. "Scouts say white men bring special tracker. Man who hunts Comanche." Tabe's voice dropped. "Man called Harper." The name meant nothing to Sarah, but its effect on both Tabe and Sakima was immediate. The old woman began chanting softly, making protective signs in the air above the triplets. "Who is Harper?" Sarah asked. "Bad spirit," Tabe replied grimly. 3 winters ago, his wife and child taken in raid. Not by Quahati, other band that broke peace. Wife died trying to escape. Child never found. Sarah closed her eyes, understanding flooding her. A man with such a past would show no mercy to any Comanche band, guilty or innocent, and he would see her as either a captive to be rescued or a traitor to her race. "We have until morning," Tabe continued. "Chief says we break camp tonight. Move deeper into hills where horses cannot easily follow. And if they catch up to us?" Sarah knew the answer but needed to hear it spoken. Tabe met her gaze steadily. "Then we fight." As the camp dissolved into organized chaos around them, Sarah held her babies close and faced the terrible truth. She had fled one form of bondage only to bring danger to those who had shown her kindness. Whatever came next, blood would be shed, and the responsibility would rest squarely on her shoulders. Unless she could find another way. "I won't be the reason children die," Sarah whispered, her decision crystallizing as she watched the Comanche camp prepare for flight. Women dismantled teepees with practiced efficiency, while warriors painted their faces with symbols of protection and battle. The triplets slept peacefully, unaware that their fate hung in the balance. Tabe looked up from checking his arrows. "What you mean? This man Harper won't stop. Not if his own child was taken." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "But I can stop him. I can end this. Understanding dawned in Tabe's eyes. You go to them. Just me. Not the babies. Sarah's voice broke. I need you to keep my children safe. Take them with your people into the hills. Tabe shook his head firmly. No. Harper not believe you came willingly without babies. Will think we hide them. Then I'll tell him they died in the storm. That grief drove me to wander until your people found me. The lie tasted bitter but necessary. Grandmother Sakima, who had been quietly listening, spoke for the first time. White man Harper filled with hate sickness. Will not believe woman's words. She pointed to the sleeping triplets. Babies safer with mother. Then what can we do? Sarah asked desperately. The old woman's eyes gleamed with ancient wisdom. Not what you do. What we do. As night fell over the camp, a small council gathered in the chief's teepee. Sarah sat beside Tabe, the triplets nestled between them, as Sakima outlined her plan. The chief, Kwana, Tabe's uncle and a legendary warrior, listened with growing approval. Brave woman, he said to Sarah when Sakima finished speaking. Worthy of Comanche. The simple words filled Sarah with unexpected pride. Among these people she should have feared, she had found respect, something James, for all his love, had rarely offered. Before dawn, the camp divided. Most of the band moved deeper into the hills with the main herd and supplies. A smaller group, including Sarah, Tabe, Sakima, and a dozen warriors, took a different path, one that would intersect with the approaching white men. As the first pale light crept over the eastern ridge, Sarah stood on a high overlook, watching dust clouds rise from Gant's approaching party. She wore borrowed Comanche garments, soft buckskin dress and moccasins far more practical than her tattered nightgown. Her hair had been braided in the Comanche style, with small beads woven into the strands. To casual observers, she might appear native from a distance. Time soon, Tabe said quietly, joining her at the cliff edge. Ready. Sarah touched the medicine pouch Sakima had given her. Filled with herbs and tiny stones the old woman claimed would protect her from harm. No, she admitted. But I'll do it anyway. Tabe's hand closed briefly over hers. I watch over you, over babies. The simple promise meant more than elaborate declarations ever could. In the days since the storm, something had grown between them. Not the passionate romance of dime novels, but something deeper. Understanding, respect, trust formed in the forge of shared danger. Harper rides lead, announced a young warrior who had been watching through a brass spyglass. A prized trade item. 12 men follow, 6 with blue coats. Soldiers, just as they had feared. Gant had convinced the army to join his rescue mission. And Gant? Sarah asked. Fat man on black horse. The warrior replied with thinly veiled contempt. Stays in back. Of course he did. Gant would never risk himself when others could do his dirty work. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what came next. She bent to kiss each of her babies, memorizing their small faces. If Sakima's plan failed, this might be the last time she held them. Be brave, little ones, she whispered. Like your father was. Like I'll try to be. With a final nod to Tabe, Sarah began her descent down the hidden trail that would place her directly in the approaching party's path. Behind her, unseen, Tabe took up his position among the rocks. The trap was set. Now they could only pray it would work. Captain James Harper reined in sharply when the figure appeared on the trail ahead. A woman, alone on foot, stumbling slightly as if exhausted. His hand moved instinctively to his rifle. Hold! He commanded as the soldiers behind him raised their weapons. It's a woman. Indian? Questioned the lieutenant beside him, squinting into the morning glare. No, Harper replied, his voice tightening as the figure drew closer. White woman, in Indian dress. A murmur ran through the men. Harper dismounted, approaching cautiously with his pistol drawn. The woman stopped, raising empty hands to show she carried no weapon. Mrs. Mitchell? He called out. Yes, she replied, her voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. I've escaped, but please no shooting. The Comanche saved me from the storm. They treated me with kindness. Harper's expression hardened. Kindness. The same word his commanding officer had used when explaining why no rescue mission would be mounted for his own wife. The Comanche sometimes show kindness to captive women, Captain. She may well be alive and treated better than our own frontier wives. His wife had been found 3 months later, her body broken from a fall while trying to escape. His child, his 5-year-old daughter, had never been found at all. "Where are your children, Mrs. Mitchell?" he demanded, closing the distance between them. A look of raw grief crossed the woman's face. "Lost in the storm. I couldn't save them." The grief seemed genuine, but Harper had seen too many white women turned by their captors. Women who chose to remain rather than return to civilization. Stockholm sympathies, the army doctor had called it. "The Indians you speak of, they would be the Quahati band?" Under Quanah Parker. Sarah hesitated just a fraction too long. I don't know. They gave me food and shelter. That's all." "Search the area," Harper ordered his men. "The children may still be alive." "Captain," Sarah stepped forward urgently. "Please. The Comanche helped me. They're moving their camp to avoid conflict. There's no need for violence." Harper studied her face. Sunburned, determined, and hiding something. What had these 3 weeks in captivity done to her? Had she truly lost her children, or was she protecting her captors? "Mrs. Mitchell," he said carefully, "I understand you may have formed attachments. It's not uncommon for captives to develop confused loyalties." "My loyalties aren't confused," Sarah replied, a flash of anger breaking through her carefully controlled expression. "I know exactly who has threatened me and who has helped me." Before Harper could respond, Willard Gant pushed his way forward, his florid face shining with sweat despite the early hour. "Sarah, thank God we found you." His concern might have seemed genuine to those who didn't know him. "What these savages did." "The only savage here is you, Gant," Sarah cut him off coldly. "Did you tell these soldiers why you were hunting me? That you threatened to sell my babies if I didn't work in your brothel?" Gant's face darkened with rage. "The woman's clearly delusional, Captain. Traumatized by her ordeal and the loss of her children." Harper looked between them, uncertainty creeping into his conviction for the first time. The hatred in the woman's eyes when she looked at Gant was unmistakable, and nothing like the complex emotions captives usually showed toward their rescuers. A sharp cry suddenly split the air, the unmistakable wail of an infant. Then another, then a third. All heads turned toward the sound, coming from a cluster of rocks just off the trail. "My God," Harper breathed. "The children are alive." Blood thundered in Sarah's ears as Tabe appeared among the rocks, holding all 3 babies. This wasn't the plan. Sakima had promised to keep the triplets hidden while Sarah convinced the soldiers to leave. Why had Tabe revealed them? His next action answered her unspoken question. Without hesitation, Tabe walked directly toward Captain Harper, holding the triplets out before him like an offering. "Baby's safe," he said clearly in English. "Woman speak truth. We find in storm. Save." Complete silence fell over the assembled men. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath. Sarah watched in disbelief as Tabe, a proud Comanche warrior, placed himself at the mercy of a man who had every reason to hate him. Harper stared at the 3 infants, then at Tabe, his expression unreadable. Something flickered across his face. Pain, recognition, doubt. "You expect me to believe you rescued them out of kindness?" Harper's voice was dangerously quiet. "3 born at once powerful medicine," Tabe replied simply. "All children sacred." The triplets, disturbed by the tension around them, began to cry in earnest. Sarah stepped forward instinctively, but a soldier blocked her path with his rifle. "Let her take the babies," Harper commanded suddenly. The soldier hesitated, then stepped aside. Sarah rushed to Tabe's side, gathering her children into her arms. The simple act of holding them again steadied her racing heart. She turned to face Harper, standing shoulder to shoulder with Tabe. "This man saved my life and my children's lives," she stated firmly. Whatever you believe about his people, whatever wrongs you've suffered, Tabe is not your enemy. Harper's hand remained on his pistol, his knuckles white with tension. You don't know what they're capable of. And you don't know what Gant is capable of, Sarah countered. She turned to the soldiers. Ask in Willow Creek about the rooms above his saloon. Ask about the girls who disappear when they can't pay their debts. She's lying, Gant shouted, but doubt had already crept into some of the soldiers' expressions. The lieutenant can take statements in town, Harper decided, his eyes never leaving Tabe. But first we deal with the Indian situation. There is no situation, Sarah insisted. The Comanche are moving their camp to avoid conflict. They've done nothing wrong. They've harbored a white woman, Gant interjected smugly. That's kidnapping under territorial law. I wasn't kidnapped. I sought refuge with them after escaping you. The argument might have continued indefinitely if not for the sudden wailing of a horn from the ridge above. All eyes turned upward as a lone figure appeared, an elderly woman supported by a walking stick. Grandmother Sakima made her way slowly down the trail, her dignity undiminished by age or the armed men watching her approach. When she reached the group, she spoke directly to Harper in clear, unaccented English. You seek lost child, she stated, not a question but a certainty. Girl child with sky-colored eyes and hair like autumn leaves. Harper's face drained of color. How could you know that? Sakima reached into her medicine pouch and withdrew a small object, offering it to Harper on her open palm. A child's toy, a tiny doll made of corn husks, its faded dress still recognizable as blue calico. My granddaughter found beyond Big River 3 winters past, Sakima continued. Child sick with spotted fever. We tried to heal, but spirit already walking between worlds. Harper took the doll with trembling hands. Emily, he whispered. This was my daughter's. Child buried with honor, Sakima said gently. Facing sunrise. Spirit released to find mother. The revelation struck Harper like a physical blow. For 3 years he had nursed his hatred, imagining his daughter still alive, still suffering, still needing rescue. The possibility of her death had been too painful to accept. Easier to channel grief into rage, into purpose. You're lying, he said, but the conviction had drained from his voice. I can show burial place, Sakima offered. 2 days ride north. Sacred ground. An anguished sound escaped Harper's throat. Not quite a sob, but close. Sarah's heart ached for him despite everything. To lose a child was a pain beyond imagining. Captain. The lieutenant spoke up uncertainly. Your orders. For a long moment, Harper stood frozen, the tiny doll clutched in his fist. Then, with visible effort, he straightened his shoulders. We came to rescue a woman and her children, he said finally. It appears they don't need rescuing. He turned to Gant. As for your accusations against these people, they seem unfounded. This is outrageous. Gant spluttered. The woman owes me money. Her husband's debts can be settled through proper legal channels? Harper cut him off. Not by hunting her across the territory with hired guns. He nodded to 2 of his men. Escort Mr. Gant back to town. Ensure he files any complaints through the territorial magistrate. Gant's face contorted with fury. You can't do this. I funded this expedition. And I'm ending it, Harper replied coldly. Unless you'd prefer I investigate those rumors about your establishment in town? The threat hung in the air between them. Finally, Gant turned away, nearly shaking with rage as the soldiers escorted him to his horse. Harper returned his attention to Sarah, Tabe, and Sakima. The children look healthy, he observed, his voice softer now. You've cared for them well. The Comanche have been kind to us, Sarah confirmed. They're my friends now. Friends, Harper repeated, testing the unfamiliar concept. He looked at Sakima. I would like to see my daughter's resting place. The old woman nodded solemnly. When next moon comes, I will send guide. An understanding passed between them, not friendship perhaps, but the beginning of peace. What will you do now, Mrs. Mitchell? Harper asked Sarah. She looked at her babies, then at Tabe. The question hung between them, unspoken but clear. Where did she belong? With her own kind in the white settlements? Or with the people who had saved her when all seemed lost? I need time, she said finally. Time to decide what's best for my children. For now, we'll stay with the Comanche. Harper nodded, surprising her with his acceptance. I'll inform the fort that you're under tribal protection by choice. He hesitated, then added, and I'll have your husband's debts examined. If Gant was charging improper interest, as many do, those debts may be reduced or forgiven. Thank you, Sarah said simply. As the soldiers prepared to depart, Harper approached Tabe. The two men stood eye to eye, enemies by history and circumstance, united only by their care for the woman and children between them. If any harm comes to them, Harper said quietly, I'll return with more men than you can count. Tabe met his gaze without flinching. No harm while I breathe. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't even trust. But it was enough for now. Sarah watched the soldiers ride away, Gant's black fury a stark contrast to Harper's quiet grief. So much had changed in so little time. 3 weeks ago she had been a wife, then a widow, then a desperate mother. Now she stood between worlds, belonging fully to neither. What happens now? She asked, turning to Tabe and Sakima. The old woman smiled, touching each baby's head in turn. Now you choose path. No one else. As they made their way back to where the Comanche waited, Sarah felt a strange lightness in her heart. For the first time since James's death, perhaps for the first time in her life, her future was truly her own to decide. The triplets gurgled happily in their slings, already at home in this wild, beautiful land. They would grow up knowing both worlds, carrying both traditions in their hearts. Not caught between cultures, but bridging them. Ready? Tabe asked as they crested the ridge where the warriors waited with horses. Sarah looked back once at the dust cloud of the departing soldiers, then turned toward the distant mountains where the Comanche band had made their new camp. Yes, she said, meaning it completely. I'm ready.